Welcome to your daily news deep dive. Looks like we've got another massive stack of articles today, all about climate and the environment.
You know, it seems like everyone's really focused on how the new political landscape is going to affect climate action.
Yeah, that's definitely a theme running through a lot of these pieces,
Definitely.
especially with President Trump back in the White House.
Seems like his administration is pushing for some pretty rapid policy changes.
It's all happening so fast.
Yeah, and the potential impact on environmental regulations is a major talking point everywhere.
I'm seeing that too. We've got articles here from all over the place. The New York Times, Climate Change Dispatch, Inside Climate News, Daily Climate.
And what are they saying?
Well, they all seem to agree that this is a pretty big shift in direction.
How big are we talking?
Some are calling it a full-blown rollback of environmental protections.
Wow.
Yeah,
The speed and scope of these changes are pretty striking.
I agree.
You've got these executive orders targeting environmental regulations.
Right.
The push for increased fossil fuel production, even the removal of, well, some are calling it gender ideology from federal agencies.
Oh, wow.
These are all actions with some pretty serious potential consequences.
It's this conflict between climate action and political ideology.
Right.
It just seems like you've got one side pushing for deregulation and fossil fuels, and the other side is really worried about the environmental impact.
Well, and it's not just theoretical.
What do you mean?
The Daily Climate is reporting that the funding freeze on USA.
The Agency for International Development.
Exactly. It's causing some real problems.
Like what?
Rural businesses that were relying on those funds,
Yeah.
they're stuck in limbo.
Oh.
Climate projects are stalled.
Oh, no.
Even disaster preparedness efforts are being affected.
That's a big deal.
It is. It's not just politics anymore.
Yeah.
It's about real-world consequences.
That's about global leadership, too, right?
It's really...
The Daily Climate was also talking about how that U.S. aid freeze is really putting Brazil's deforestation fight at risk.
Makes sense.
They were saying the loss of that funding could have a domino effect,
Right.
discouraging other nations.
And corporations.
Exactly, from supporting the Amazon rainforest's protection.
And with the U.S. pulling back from global climate commitments,
Yeah,
it sends a pretty powerful message.
no, not a good one.
It potentially undermines international cooperation on climate action.
At a time when we need it most.
Exactly.
It's not all bad news, though.
Oh, good.
We've also got some articles here from sources like the Daily Climate and Atmos.
Okay.
They're highlighting this growing counter-movement,
Oh, interesting.
pushing back against these changes.
Well, what are they doing?
Well, you've got scientists working to save environmental data.
The stuff that was erased from federal websites.
Yeah. They're restoring climate justice tools.
Really?
And there are all these legal challenges being mounted against the administration's actions.
Sounds like a race against time.
It really does.
But it's inspiring, right?
It is.
To see the dedication and resilience of people who understand how urgent this climate crisis is.
They're working so hard to fill the gaps left by the government,
Often in really innovative ways.
using all sorts of new approaches and technology.
That's what we need.
The fact that data scientists were able to restore that climate and economic justice screening tool.
The one the Trump administration took offline,
Yeah,
they got it back up in just 48 hours.
I know. Isn't that remarkable?
It really is. It speaks volumes about the power of expertise and fast action.
And it also highlights how important that tool is.
Right.
It helps identify communities that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
And it's not just scientists fighting back.
Right. The articles also highlight local leaders, businesses, communities stepping up to make climate progress on their own.
That's great.
Like Houston's move towards green energy
Okay.
and all the legal action to hold polluters accountable.
Those are some great examples.
This trend of localized climate action is really important.
Absolutely. While national policies are all over the place.
Totally.
This ground-up momentum shows that the fight for climate action is much bigger than what's happening in Washington.
It's a hopeful sign for sure.
Yes.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the scientific discoveries that are making headlines.
Sounds good.
There's this article from Science Daily about scientists who have simulated the effects of an asteroid collision.
Really?
Yeah, on climate and plants.
You know, while we're all worried about human-caused climate change,
Right.
it's a good reminder that there are other potential threats out there.
The article didn't really go into much detail, though.
About what?
about what would actually happen if a medium-sized asteroid hit Earth.
Well, their simulation suggests there would be these massive dust clouds.
Blocking out the sun.
Yeah.
And widespread fires.
And then a really rapid drop in global temperatures.
Wow.
So it wouldn't be an instant extinction event. But the long-term consequences for plants and ecosystems would be devastating.
Can you imagine?
A world plunged into this prolonged period of darkness and cold.
That's a scary thought.
It is. But at least scientists are keeping an eye out for those threats.
That's reassuring. Okay, let's talk about something a little more immediate.
Sure.
Science Daily and The Conversation are both reporting on the accelerating melt of polar ice.
And its potential impact on ocean currents.
Exactly.
That's a major development. Could have some really profound consequences for global climate patterns.
A study led by
Former NASA scientist James Hansen.
Yeah.
They found that global warming has accelerated significantly since 2010.
Really?
With a really sharp temperature rise in just the past 2 years.
Wow. And they're linking this warming surge to the rapid melting of Arctic ice.
Right.
Which they say could disrupt those critical ocean currents.
And that could lead to more extreme weather, sea level rise.
Yeah.
Even threats to food security.
So the potential collapse of the AMOC.
The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation is particularly worrying.
Because?
This system of ocean currents plays a crucial role in regulating the Earth's climate.
So it's disrupted.
It could trigger these abrupt shifts in rainfall and temperature patterns.
And that would have what kind of effects?
Really dramatic impacts on agriculture.
Okay.
Fresh water availability.
Wow.
It would make it much harder to feed a growing population.
These are serious concerns. We've also got news about California dealing with record-breaking rainfall.
After all those years of drought?
It seems like those prayers for rain finally worked.
It's a mixed blessing, though, isn't it?
How so?
Well, the rain definitely helps with the drought.
Right.
But it also raises concerns about flooding.
Yeah.
And potential damage to infrastructure.
Things that aren't built to handle these intense weather events.
Exactly.
It's like California is this microcosm of the challenges we're facing.
Trying to balance the need for resources with the increasing risks from climate change.
And it's not just about infrastructure either.
What else?
There are also concerns about the impact of climate change on public health.
Especially in communities that are already dealing with environmental burdens.
The Daily Climate and Slate are both highlighting how the Trump administration's dismantling of environmental justice programs is basically reversing years of progress.
Progress that was aimed at addressing the unequal impact of pollution on marginalized communities.
It's a step backward for sure.
Erasing data.
Silencing experts.
Rolling back protection.
It all raises some serious questions about this administration's commitment to protecting the health and well-being of all Americans.
It does. But there are some glimmers of hope out there, too.
Oh, good. Like what?
The Los Angeles Times had a piece about state officials recommending new rules
to protect California renters from extreme heat.
Exactly.
These proposed rules would require landlords to make sure that rental units can be cooled
to a safe indoor air temperature.
Right. It would offer much-needed relief for vulnerable populations during heat waves.
It's a positive step towards addressing the unequal impacts of climate change.
And it shows that progress is still possible, even with all the political setbacks.
That's encouraging.
Okay, let's talk about the Long Beach Aquarium now.
What about it?
They've released their first ever marine species report card.
Interesting.
It assesses the population trends of 30 coastal California species.
So it gives us a snapshot of how our oceans are doing.
And how are they doing?
Well, the report shows a mixed picture.
How so?
Some species are recovering, others are still declining.
Oh, no.
It highlights how climate change, pollution, overfishing, they're all affecting marine life.
In these really complex ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Protecting our oceans demands that we address all of these stressors.
This report just underscores how important monitoring and research are.
You sure?
For tracking those changes in our oceans.
And informing conservation efforts.
We have to understand these trends to develop effective conservation strategies.
Absolutely.
Speaking of conservation.
Yeah.
There's an article from The Conversation exploring why personal climate action matters.
Even when we're facing these massive challenges.
Exactly.
It's a good reminder that our individual actions may seem small,
right,
but collectively they can contribute to a broader shift in norms and behaviors.
Imagine millions of people making conscious choices every day.
It could have a real impact.
It's also about recognizing that our choices are a form of political expression.
Signaling our values and pushing for change.
Exactly. Individual action is about aligning our actions with our values.
And contributing to the collective good.
It's not about being perfect.
It's about making conscious choices that benefit the planet.
Before we move on, let's just do a quick recap.
Sounds good?
We've seen this really dramatic shift in the political landscape.
With President Trump's return.
Yeah. Leading to some significant policy changes that are impacting climate action.
Both domestically and internationally.
We've also seen this determined counter-movement.
Pushing back against those changes.
Right. With scientists, activists, and local communities stepping up to fill the gaps.
It's definitely a dynamic situation. Things are changing all the time.
And then, amidst all this political turmoil, we've learned about some really groundbreaking scientific research.
Research that sheds light on how complex the climate crisis really is.
Everything from the potential impact of asteroid collisions to the accelerating melt of polar ice.
And its effects on those ocean currents.
We've also seen how these global trends are playing out locally.
With communities dealing with both droughts and floods.
And working to find innovative solutions to deal with the impacts of climate change.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But it's important to stay informed and engaged.
The more we understand about the challenges we face,
the better equipped we'll be to find solutions.
It's interesting to see how these broader climate trends are playing out at the local level. We have a few stories from California that really illustrate this.
Yeah, California always seems to be on the front lines of these issues.
This time it's kind of a mix of challenges and opportunities.
Okay.
Let's start with the aftermath of those wildfires.
Okay.
State Farm is seeking a steep rate hike.
After those devastating fires in LA.
Exactly. They're citing over $1 billion in claims.
Wow, that's a huge financial burden for homeowners. It really underscores how climate change is getting expensive.
It is. And it's not just the immediate costs of damage and rebuilding.
Right.
You also have those long-term costs.
Like what?
Insurance hikes, property devaluation, even displacement of entire communities.
It's this cascading effect with all these far-reaching consequences. Speaking of cascades, there are also those reports of record-breaking rainfall in California. It's a strange juxtaposition. Wildfires 1 minute and floods the next.
It highlights the volatility of weather patterns.
In a changing climate.
Right. California is getting hit from both sides.
It's a reminder that we need to be ready for more of these extreme events in the future.
Absolutely.
It's like the state is becoming a microcosm for the whole global climate crisis. And it's not just California. We also have that article from NASA about that slow-moving storm that dumped tons of rain on Queensland, Australia.
Another example of climate change intensifying these rainfall events.
All over the world.
These storms can cause so much damage, widespread flooding, damage to crops, critical infrastructure, even loss of life.
It's a real reminder of the human cost of climate change. Okay, let's shift back to the political arena for a minute. We have a couple of stories about the economic and political challenges of transitioning to clean energy.
What have we got?
There's the piece from Climate Change Dispatch about green energy groups fighting to keep those Biden-era tax credits.
Oh, yeah.
Seems like the renewable energy industry is worried about losing those subsidies now that Trump's back in office.
I can understand why they're worried. Those tax credits have been really important for driving the growth of renewable energy in the U.S.
So losing them could really slow things down.
Significantly. It's a classic example of how policy uncertainty can make investors hesitate.
And stifle innovation.
Exactly.
We also have that story from Politico about offshore wind projects stalling.
What's happening?
New Jersey is putting a hold on new approvals.
That's a tough one. Gov Murphy seems to be giving in to political pressure and economic concerns.
Even though offshore wind was supposed to be a key part of his clean energy agenda.
It's a tricky balancing act, trying to juggle climate goals with economic realities.
And political opposition to renewables.
This situation shows how much we need strong leadership and a clear vision for the future of energy in this country.
We can't keep switching gears every time a new administration comes in.
Exactly. We need a long-term strategy, something that transcends partisan politics and gives the renewable energy sector some stability.
Okay, let's move on to some brighter spots now.
I'm always up for some good news.
There's that article from the Daily Climate about how climate victories are happening all the time, even if they don't make the headlines.
It's important to celebrate those wins, no matter how small they seem.
They give us hope.
And remind us that change is possible.
The article mentions a few key examples.
Like what?
The Montana court ruling.
The one that sided with those youth climate activists?
That's the one.
That's huge.
And organizations like Client Earth.
Winning those international legal battles against polluting industries.
Yeah.
Those are some big victories.
It shows the power of collective action and the growing legal recognition that climate change is a serious problem.
It is.
And it's not just about lawsuits either. The article also talks about the growing trend of local climate action.
Cities,
Businesses.
communities taking
It's
action.
a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Local action can drive innovation, build resilience, inspire other communities to do the same.
It's this grassroots movement that complements the policy changes at higher levels.
It's about empowering people to be part of the solution.
I like that. Agency and collective responsibility.
Mm.
And speaking of responsibility, we also have that article from the conversation about the role of personal climate action.
Right.
Our individual choices matter, even if they seem insignificant compared to the global scale.
It's about aligning our actions with our values, contributing to a shift in social norms.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of the problem, but we can also be part of the solution.
Making those conscious choices every day. Choices that reflect our commitment to a healthier planet.
Well said. Our choices can inspire others to take action too. And there's that article from the Daily Climate about how embracing a love for our world could help us tackle this climate crisis.
What's an interesting angle?
The article argues that we need to move beyond fear and guilt
Oh, okay.
and tap into that deeper sense of love and connection with nature.
It's about changing our emotional approach to the climate crisis.
Yeah. It's about seeing the beauty and wonder of the planet, even as we face these challenges.
And recognizing our connection to all living things.
Exactly. It's a beautiful way of looking at it. It reminds me of that John Muir quote.
Which one?
When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It really gets at that interdependence of all things. Protecting the planet isn't just about saving the environment, it's about saving ourselves.
Our well-being is tied to the well-being of the planet.
We have this moral obligation to care for the earth and everything on it.
Okay, let's move on to a few more specific stories that caught our attention.
Yeah.
First up is that article from the LA Times about the proposal to rename the Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf of America.
Yeah.
That's definitely sparked some debate.
It's a pretty bold idea.
Some might say it's a bit nationalistic.
For sure. But the article also raises some interesting questions about the history and identity of the region.
It points out that the Gulf of Mexico has always been this shared space, connecting the U.S., Mexico, and Cuba.
So renaming it could be seen as trying to erase that shared history and assert American dominance.
It's a complicated issue, historical and geopolitical implications.
It reflects the broader political climate we're in. Okay, next up is that inspiring story about the revival of the Seine River in Paris.
Oh, yeah. A great example of how environmental restoration can really work.
Decades of cleaning up the water.
And now it's full of life, fish, wildlife.
It's a remarkable turnaround.
It shows what's possible when we invest in environmental protection.
It's a story of hope and resilience. Proof that we can make a difference. All right, let's dive into some of the latest scientific research on climate change now.
Sounds good. I'm ready for more.
There's a fascinating study from Science Daily.
What's it about?
How these drying and rewetting cycles are increasing soil carbon dioxide release.
Soil is a major player in the global carbon cycle.
Right. Stores huge amounts of carbon dioxide.
This study found that when soil dries out and then gets wet again,
It releases a burst of carbon dioxide,
and climate change is disrupting these natural cycles,
leading to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
which just makes the problem worse.
It's like a vicious cycle. Climate change feeding itself.
A positive feedback loop, but the study does suggest some ways to mitigate these emissions. Changes in land management practices, for example.
So there's still hope for intervention.
There is always hope. Another study from Science Daily looked at how climate change is changing marine nutrient cycles,
Nutrients are essential for marine life.
the foundation of those ecosystems.
Mhm.
The study shows that as the planet warms, it changes how nutrients move through the ocean.
So climate change is affecting the very basis of marine ecosystems.
Exactly, which could have all sorts of cascading effects.
Yeah.
Fish populations, food webs, the overall health of the ocean.
Another reminder of how everything is interconnected.
We need more research to really grasp the full extent of climate change's impact on marine life.
I agree. And then there's this study from The Conversation. The importance of gender equality for a climate-resilient future.
It's an often overlooked aspect of the issue.
The study argues that gender equality is not just a social justice issue,
It's a climate resilience issue,
because women are often hit hardest by climate change.
especially in developing countries.
Less access to resources,
Mhm.
education, decision-making power.
Empowering women is essential if we want to build climate resilience.
It's about making sure everyone has the tools and opportunities to adapt to a changing climate.
Well put. Our final science story for today is from Science Daily,
Okay.
a new method for modeling how plants move water globally.
It's pretty technical.
It is, but it's also really interesting. Plants play a vital role in the global water cycle, absorbing water from the soil, releasing it into the atmosphere through transpiration.
Right.
This new method lets scientists model that process really accurately. It gives us valuable insights into how climate change is affecting the global water cycle.
Which could help us develop more sustainable water management practices.
Exactly. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's take a step back and think about what we've learned.
We've covered so much, from the political battles in Washington to those inspiring stories of climate action around the world.
We've seen the devastating impacts of climate change, but also witnessed the incredible efforts to address this challenge.
The latest scientific discoveries, the innovative solutions that are emerging.
And those reminders that our individual choices matter, even when faced with these huge problems.
So what's the main takeaway from this whirlwind tour of the climate crisis?
I think the big takeaway is that we're at a turning point. The choices we make now will determine the future of our planet.
That's a sobering thought.
It's also a call to action. We can't be complacent. We need to demand action from our leaders, support those on the front lines, and make changes in our own lives.
We're all in this together. We have a shared responsibility to protect this planet.
We do. And even amidst all these challenges, it's important to hold on to hope. Hope in human ingenuity, the resilience of the natural world, and our ability to work together to create a better future.
Hope is essential. It fuels our passion, guides our actions, reminds us that a different world is possible. Let's explore some more news from the front lines of the climate crisis in our last segment. You know, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the climate crisis when we're thinking about all these global trends.
Yeah, all the scientific discoveries.
But there's so much happening locally that can give us a sense of hope.
A sense of agency, too, like we can actually do something.
Exactly. We have a couple of stories that really highlight that.
Okay.
There's that piece from the LA Times about Chuckwalla National Monument.
Chuckwalla. It's a great example of finding that balance
Between
renewable energy development and conservation.
They've built this huge solar farm right inside the monument.
And they have.
A solar farm inside a national monument. That's not something you see every day.
It's unusual, but it's working really well. They've designed it to blend in with the landscape
So they're generating clean energy.
without disrupting the natural beauty of the monument.
That's amazing.
It's a great example of what's possible when you combine innovative design with a commitment to both conservation and clean energy.
It gives me hope that we can find these creative solutions that work for everyone.
Solutions that benefit both people and the planet.
And it's not just about these big projects like solar farms.
Sometimes the smaller initiatives can make a big difference too.
The LA Times also had a piece about the effort to remove palm trees from Los Angeles.
No, right.
I was surprised by that. I always thought palm trees were such an iconic part of LA.
They are, but they're also a major fire hazard.
Really? I didn't know that.
Palm trees are very flammable, and they're not native to the area.
So they don't have the same fire-resistant properties as native trees.
Exactly.
So removing them is a way to reduce the risk of wildfires.
It's a simple solution.
But sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. It's about being creative.
Challenging the status quo.
We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring this complex world of climate news.
We have.
The political battles, the scientific breakthroughs, the community-led initiatives.
All shaping the fight against climate change.
It's been a roller coaster of information, highlighting the seriousness of the crisis, but also the incredible efforts to address it.
We've seen firsthand the impacts of climate change on communities around the world.
But we've also witnessed the resilience of those working towards a better future.
Finding those innovative solutions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one message we want our listeners to take away?
We're at a crucial moment in history. The decisions we make today will shape the future of our planet. It's time to act, to demand change from our leaders, to support those who are working tirelessly to make a difference, and to make responsible choices in our own lives.
I'll connect.
We have a shared responsibility to protect this planet.
And even in the face of these daunting challenges, we need to hold on to hope.
Hope in human ingenuity, hope in the resilience of nature, and hope in our collective power to create a brighter future.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the climate news of the day. We'll be back tomorrow with more insights and analysis. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.